Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. Buck Rising here with you for another week. Some really interesting results across the National Football League over the course of this weekend and certainly into Monday Night Football. Greg, I hope you enjoyed the way that Aaron Rodgers drove down the field at the end of the game with 37 seconds left, the way that the rest of the country did. I couldn't believe that.
Well, I did not see that live, but when I watched the tape, he made that first throw he made to Devontae Adams. I'm not sure how many people would have attempted that throw, much less made it, Buck. And you really could not say anything negative about Fred Warner. He got incredible depth. He's an underneath defender, and he got about as deep as you could possibly get in that zone coverage concept. And I slowed it down and stopped it, and the ball literally went 5 inches over his outstretched hand. So it was just one of those Aaron Rodgers throws. And by the way, I thought Aaron Rodgers in that game played exceptionally well. He actually threw a touchdown as well earlier in the game to Valdez-Scantling, a 12-yard touchdown in the corner of the end zone on what we call a double smash concept. That throw, too, was another throw I'm not sure how many people would have even attempted. And not only did he attempt it, but it was an unbelievable throw.
Oh, he nailed it with the defensive back just diving in front of it, or trying to dive in front of it at the last possible second. We've seen him do it a million times, but it never stops being fascinating.
I mean, he was really, really good in that game, and it pretty much started right on the first series. You know, one point I always make about Rodgers is no quarterback in the NFL attacks one-on-one coverage when he sees it with more efficiency and precision than Rodgers. And he has the freedom, Buck, to do that. So if there's a given play call and he sees one-on-one coverage with a favorable one that he feels good about, he has the freedom to do that. You know, and keep in mind, they played with a left tackle making his first NFL start, Yosh Nijman, who was actually a 3-year starter in college at Virginia Tech. So it's not as if he hasn't played football. But Rodgers is the kind of quarterback that can compensate for that kind of thing. If you don't feel comfortable with your left tackle, and don't forget, he was going up against Nick Bosa the large majority of the evening, Nijman was, and he had some struggles. There were some pass protection snaps. He clearly did not do a good job, but Rodgers, for the most part, can compensate for that just because he knows how to play the quarterback position so well, and he just understands it. It just very quickly, it reminds me of the story. Ron Jaworski is one of my close friends. We worked together for years and years. And he would always tell me that when Dick Vermeil was his head coach for years back with the Eagles, that on Saturdays, Vermeil would tell Jaws, the quarterback, he wouldn't tell the rest of the offense, but he would tell Jaws, hey, this week, you know, our left tackle might have some problems in one-on-one protection. You need to be aware of that. Yeah. So Jaws would be aware that, hey, you know, if I have to take a deep drop, it could be an issue. So I have to understand that. And I always feel like Rodgers always understands where a potential weakness is on his offensive line, and he knows how to camouflage that potential weakness.
It feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but it feels like Tom Brady, of course, you know, comparing greats to other greats, but Tom Brady, of course, has been one of those quarterbacks who's been able to compensate for poor offensive line play, or maybe not the caliber of offensive line play that we believe is in front of him, just with the ability to adjust to that protection.
And I think great quarterbacks, and I don't, you know me, Buck, I don't overuse the word great, but clearly Rodgers and Brady fall into that category.
These two, it's okay. This is not a hot take.
No. You know, I think those kinds of quarterbacks just, they understand it intellectually, and then they can execute it intuitively. And I think that those guys just do it. Young quarterbacks can't do that. You know, for instance, I'll give you an example. And I'm not getting into this whole issue with the coach, but Justin Fields is certainly not ready to do that. And Justin Fields had some throws where he should have turned it loose this week, and for whatever reason, it just didn't register to him. You know, only he can tell you why and what he saw. And people have debated all week about the coaching staff and all that. But at this point, based on that game, okay, that's all we have. And you know me, I'm not making a statement about what's happened before or what's going to happen after. In that game, he did not see things. He was locked in on reads with almost no sense of elimination and isolation, meaning he did not have a feel for eliminating what's not there and isolating what is there. He was both too fast at times and too hesitant at other times. And he doesn't have, at this point in time, an innate feel of what open means in the NFL. So can we debate whether there should have been, 7-man protection on every play? I'll leave that for others to debate. But Fields missed a number of throws where he should have turned it loose, and he just didn't see it.
Yeah, and that's certainly something that's going on throughout the course of sports media this week. But Greg, I could just to stay with that game for a second, I could not take my eyes off Myles Garrett. I thought the film was sped up when I went back and watched some of the plays. He just a man that size, and I know he's one of these, the latest in unblockable NFL players, but Myles Garrett is such a fascination to me in the way that they're using him all over the defensive front. It was hard, even if there had been additional blockers kept in to try and keep Justin Fields upright. I don't know how much good it would have done with that particular offensive line going against that guy.
Well, it's funny you say that because Garrett, we all know, but I'll tell you the guy who you know from his time in Tennessee, who I thought has looked better than he ever has, was Jadeveon Clowney.
Yeah,
I thought Clowney, for the first time, really looked quick and explosive as a pass rusher because he has not been a quality pass rusher. He's been a splash player. He's been a good run defender, but he's not been truly a pass rusher. Or quite frankly, Buck, he wouldn't be on his fourth team before the age of 28 because explosive pass rushers do not move around the league like that. So I thought he looked as good on tape in that one game as I've seen him look maybe in his NFL career, other than just, a few plays here and there. But throughout that game, he looked quick. He looked explosive. They moved him inside in their sub fronts. And I think he's really, really good inside. But he also showed excellent quickness on the outside. So to me, he looked really, really strong in that game.
I'd be curious to see how that experiment goes throughout the course of the Browns season. A really, really talented team. That seems to be, going to be able to do well in that division, given that the Steelers appear to be on the downturn.
If they can beat the Bengals, only if they can beat the Bengals, right?
The mighty Bengals. Look at the Bengals, Greg. It's exciting stuff. It's nice to see this kind of new guard of NFL quarterbacks come in and start to take strides. I've been watching Ben. Nothing against Ben, but I've been watching Ben for a long time. It's nice to see some fresh blood in the AFC North. Let's start though with the local professional football team, Greg. A big divisional win for them, and what should have been a bigger win for them. Frankly, Mike Vrabel was pissed in the post-game press conference with us because the mental mistakes that they made, the turnovers that they ended up coughing up, whether on Ryan Tannehill or not. You could go back and forth on those two interceptions. But Greg, I thought they played certainly on defense one of the better games. I thought that Jeffrey Simmons again showed up big on tape. I thought that was one of Harold Landry's more impressive performances. We know that they were working with a lot of different parts on the offensive line in Indianapolis, and Carson Wentz clearly couldn't move at all. But what did you make of the defensive performance of the Titans against the Colts?
I think their defensive front's really coming along. I think that's where you have to start because it really all does start there. If your defensive front, which obviously a year ago was not very good, certainly not good as a pass rush unit, and it started last week, and we spoke about that a week ago with how their defensive front played and the stunts, and it continued over to this week. I think that is a really positive sign as they go forward. Now, they have the Jets this week, and obviously people are going to say, okay, it's the Jets, it's an easy win, but it is the NFL. But I think that's a really positive sign. I would think offensively, there's some things that need to be cleaned up. They had no big plays in this game. Their biggest pass play, Buck, was to Swaim, okay? Yeah. And that was on that. It was beautifully designed, but it was still to Swaim. And I know A.J. Brown is out, and my guess is he'll be out this week because it's a hamstring, is it not?
That's correct.
So I would doubt he would go this week. But and Julio did have a plus 20-yard completion on I believe it was on a high-low concept where he caught it to the outside. But other than that, it was Swaim's 26-yarder, which came off basically their run game concept, zone lead, and then the boot action. So they need to find a way to create some explosive plays in the pass game. Otherwise, you get stuck playing games like that where in the fourth quarter, anything can happen. One negative play by you, one really good positive play by your opponent, and you lose games that you feel like you should win and that you're in control of.
Yeah, it was really interesting to watch them on offense. And it has been the last couple of weeks, Greg, because, that was something that you and I have talked about before. Arthur Smith's so good at creating those explosive plays for the Tennessee Titans in his years here as offensive coordinator. And that it hasn't been completely absent. There have been some missed opportunities, some drops, but certainly the personnel was much different in this game than under normal circumstances it might be. I want to ask you, Greg, if you've noticed a lack of motion pre-snap from the Tennessee Titans under Todd Downing as opposed to Arthur Smith, not necessarily asking for percentages of how often or how little they're using motion, but it's something that I don't notice as much when I go back and watch them on film this year.
I think we have to separate motions and shifts.
Okay.
Because they do shift. Now, just so people understand the difference, a shift is when a player moves and then totally resets before the snap of the ball. A motion is when a player moves and the ball essentially gets snapped while he's moving or before he can settle. So those are two different things. They use shifts more than motions. So my question is, not to you, but for people in general,
sure,
motion has become the in vogue thing to talk about, Buck, as you well know. Okay?
Yeah.
Everybody now says, oh, the NFL, you have to have motion. Well, what basically people are saying is if you don't use a lot of motion in today's NFL, you can't possibly have a good offense. Now, that's not necessarily true. Now, motion can be a strong factor. We know there are certain teams that use a lot of it. We know the Niners use a lot of it. We know the Chiefs use a lot of it. The Chargers are using a lot of it now with a new coaching staff. But a team that's 0-3 that uses a lot of it are the Detroit Lions. So motion in and of itself doesn't automatically mean you're going to win more games. But what motion does is, one of the things it does is the more the offense moves before the snap with motion, the more the defense has to communicate. Now, some defenses might not communicate at all and just stay static, but most defenses will communicate, and that puts some pressure on their calls and on their checks. Some defensive coordinators, if they face teams that use a lot of motion, Buck, will tighten up their play calls. Instead of using their whole play sheet, they'll tighten up their play calls because they want to make sure they're in things they feel really good about and that there's no confusion or miscommunication. So the term a lot of people use with teams that motion a lot is that motion can regulate the defense. But in and of itself, motion doesn't automatically mean that your offense is better.
Yeah.
And there's quarterbacks, as we know, that don't like motion. Peyton Manning never wanted motion, ever. He was pretty good. Now, I'm not saying, I don't know how Ryan Tannehill feels about it. I don't know how the coaching staff feels about it. Maybe we'll see more of it. Maybe we won't. All I will say is, just automatically doing motion doesn't mean now that your offense is going to be great.
Right. Yeah, no, certainly something, just a general observation. I'm glad that we clarified shifts, the difference between shifts and motion, because I know how many people who are film analysts on Twitter, Greg, certainly confuse. It's like talking about the RPO. They don't entirely know what they're looking at.
And it's become a big thing. I mean, I see social media just like you do, a number of smart people who write about football, it's pretty much it's out there now that, motion's got to do motion or you can't play. That's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
I mean, there's teams, look, I know Tom Brady's pretty good, but the Buccaneers have used less motion than the Titans this year.
Right.
So you don't automatically have to use motion.
And we'll get to Tom Brady and the Bucs performance against the Los Angeles Rams here in just a second, given that Tom's got a pretty big game coming up. But we talked last week, Greg, about the room for improvement with the Titans' run game. Derrick Henry has a statistically impressive performance, but they weren't necessarily executing the way that they're accustomed to. When I watch back, having Taylor Lewan, it seemed helped quite substantially. He was more impactful than we have seen him been in quite some time. What were your observations about Derrick Henry in this running game?
It's funny you asked me that, because I got the sense watching the tape that they challenged Lewan and Saffold this week, because their run game went predominantly to the left side of the offensive formation. And I still think they can be more consistent in their execution of their run game. I mean, Henry, I think, had a 19-yard run and a 14-yard run. And other than that, it was tough sailing. He's been far more effective running out of 12 personnel, meaning one back and two tight ends. Excuse me. He's not as effective running out of 11 personnel, meaning one back, one tight end, and three wide receivers. So I'm sure they know this as well. But I think that the running game is still a work in progress. Look, I know Derrick Henry. I've been around him. I've stood next to him in my life. So I know what he looks like, and he's just a freak, But I just wonder, 35 carries 2 weeks ago, 28 this week. Can you do that every single week? Maybe you can. The guy the last 2 years has been freakish, and he is built differently than most. Yeah. But that's just an awful lot of carries and an awful lot of touches. And I just wonder if that can continue with 14 more games to play.
Yeah, and he's doing it on 3 less carries than he did through 3 games a year ago, and I don't think that's going to get any easier for him with Julio. A possibility to not play for at least this coming week, if not future weeks, and of course AJ Brown dealing with what he's dealing with.
So Julio will not play this week, likely either.
It feels like it's trending that way. Yeah. Now it's early in the week. There may be positive developments, but I mean, they all but not benched him. That's not the proper term, but they pulled him out basically in that fourth quarter, Greg, because they were trying to manage him in game to preserve him.
Yeah.
For future.
Well, it could be Racey McMath time, Buck.
It's the most ridiculous thing AJ Brown's ever said to us, is that he sees a lot of Julio in Racey McMath. That is something that I have yet to observe.
Well, the guy is big and can run. That's what he can do. So that's why you say that. And I'm fascinated by him because he was a big time recruit at LSU. And they're a receiver school, and it just didn't work out. And you and I were not there, so we don't know exactly why. From what I gather, he's not a bad kid, right?
No,
you gather?
No, and we saw kind of freakishly athletic plays during training camp, and you take from that what you will. But
right, but I mean, hey, maybe this is the kid gets a shot, and look, you got to throw the ball in the NFL, so it's not like they're never going to throw it. So it's going to be thrown to someone, and it looks like he's going to get meaningful snaps if both Brown and Jones are out.
Yeah, and the Jets' offense may be struggling, but their defense looks like it's still pretty formidable at this point. Even
with a bunch of guys, by the way, who a lot of people would have no idea who they are.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Robert Saleh is at least handling that side of the ball, or at least the Jets are handling that side of the ball pretty well. So we won't spend too much time on that game, Greg, because there are some massive games in the NFL coming up. I mean, I want to start with Brady at New England and all the hype and the narratives that go into it, but watching that Rams-Bucks game back, Tom had to do a ton of heavy lifting through the air. They weren't able to get anything done on the ground. I know they had the Brady sneak touchdown and the Godwin touchdown as well, trying to get creative in the running game, but the Rams weren't giving them anything as far as their running attack was concerned. What did you see from the Bucks on offense, and how were the Rams, who seem to have kept their same defensive scheme under Raheem Morris, how were they kind of attacking Tampa Bay?
Well, let me say this. Brady, we know what Brady is. I don't need to qualify Tom Brady and say he's great.
Right.
But no matter how great you are, it's still really hard to ask your quarterback to be great every single week in order to win. And by the way, I thought he was really good this Sunday. I mean,
really good.
He's been really, really good.
It's crazy.
The precision with which he plays is just remarkable to me. The repetitive mechanics, the understanding of what he sees before the snap of the ball. Obviously, you've got to validate it as you drop, which he does. His precise ball location, his feel for bodies around him. Because don't forget, he's not a mover. Now, he has pocket movement, but he's not going to run out of the pocket. So he has such a good feel for working and managing the pocket, which you have to be a great pocket quarterback. And the fact that the ball is coming out still with velocity, he has a good arm. He's always had a good arm. He's never been given credit for that because it's not a gun in a strict sense, but he's got a good arm.
Yeah.
And I'm just amazed at how well he's throwing the football, but it's all the other things too. So he threw 55 balls this week. Okay. Their run game has been absolutely non-existent. And clearly they've chosen not to run it. That becomes a Bruce Arians question as to why they've essentially chosen not to run it.
Yeah.
I can't answer that question, but Brady has played at a really, really high level. He's now playing against a defense that's pretty good in New England. They'll do a lot of things, I would imagine, up front. What they do up front is there's a lot of multiple front looks. They'll stunt. They'll try to create pressures. But it's hard to throw it 55 times every week and win games. Isn't it interesting how well he played this week? And this was the first time in 9, 10, 11 games they did not get to 30 points.
It's crazy to me. And to your point, I mean, we have such a high standard and a high expectation of Tom that to continue to expect for him to be able to do it, not entirely on his own, but damn near it felt like on Sunday, is completely unrealistic, even great as he's been.
Yeah, and like I said, it's just hard because don't forget, it's not just him. It's your O-line has to pass protect.
Yeah.
It's not just him.
Yeah.
And he's so good, but we'll see. We'll see what the approach is this Sunday. I can't say what it will be. Clearly, they've thrown the ball a ton. I would bet he's got the most pass attempts in the league. I don't specifically know the answer to that right offhand. I could easily find that out right now, but my guess is, if not, he's right there. He's got to
be up there. He's got to be up there. I mean, certainly between him and Dak Prescott.
Brady has, let's see. Brady has the most pass attempts in the league.
44 years old. He's still out there, 10 touchdowns.
So think about this. He's got he's dropped back 150 times. Okay. Yeah. That's dropbacks. So that means he's had 50 dropbacks on average per game. That's a lot of dropbacks in an NFL game. That's a lot of pressure to put on your offensive line.
Yeah. And the offensive line is, Brady can make them better, but it's still a tough task to ask them to hold up that way. Yeah. So where does if we're looking at this from Brady against Belichick, offense against defense, where is the advantage for Tom and this offense from a personnel standpoint? Where do they find ways to win?
Well, they're a better team. I mean, the big question here to me, and this is what's fascinating, quite honestly, is New England will struggle to score. Now, I know that Tampa has some issues in their secondary. I believe they signed Richard Sherman today.
He had his press conference. He was very happy to be there.
Yeah, and I don't know what that means for Sunday, how many snaps he would get.
Right.
But I would think that, look, Mac Jones, they haven't asked him to do very much. We've seen the limitations with his arm. There's certain throws that he's not going to make particularly well. There's certain throws that lose energy because he can't really drive the football. They're going to have to try to run the ball. Tampa's a very difficult defense to run against with Vita Vea up front, with Ndamukong Suh up front. They still are good with their front seven. The back end, obviously, is a little bit problematic right now when you look at who's out. Because obviously Jamal Dean will be out, but Carlton Davis is still there. Ross Cockrell's had to play nickel since Murphy Bunting went out week 1. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know what Tampa's offensive approach will be. To me, I think you'd want to see them try to run it more. Now, they're not going to become a running team, but I think they're going to have to try to run it a little more than they are right now.
I can't wait to watch that game. I know everybody else And I don't, Greg, I know you don't watch a ton of them live. Are you gonna go out of your way to watch this one? Or are you
No. I watch Red Zone on Sunday, Buck. And then I watch the tape.
Hey, listen, that's why Greg's the best, because he does not diverge from the path, no matter how intriguing the matchup in real time. So let's talk about, Greg. I mean, you brought up the Carolina Panthers last week.
Yeah.
And it was such an impressive performance. One of the better games, certainly in the second half, that I think we've seen from Sam Darnold as a pro, given how much it changed in the immediacy after Christian McCaffrey went out and how they found ways to rebound on Thursday Night Football. This game for Carolina this coming weekend at Dallas, another incredible offense that seemed to really find its stride on the ground as opposed to just through the air, against the Philadelphia Eagles, who I know you're intimately familiar with as well. What can you say about Sam Darnold on Thursday Night Football, and what gives Carolina the edge, if any, against a Dallas team that I thought the coverage was really, really good by Dallas throughout the course of that game against Philly?
Well, Darnold's played well this year. I think, Joe Brady has done a really good job with him. They've made him decisive. You've got to define it for him. I mean, every coach tries to do that, but some do it better than others. That's why some coaches are better than others. People know what you have to do with Darnold. He's not at his best the longer he stays in the pocket. He's not a great late in the down pocket thrower. He still can have some reckless tendencies when he leaves the pocket, although he can make throws on the run. But you're trying to define it for him. I think he's gotten better before the snap of the ball. He's going to face a Dallas defense that I can't remember if we spoke about it last week when I told you that they were very fast and aggressive, and they still are. And they now are getting more and more multiple with their fronts. Yeah. So he's going to have to recognize that pre-snap. He's going to have to set protections. He's going to have to make sure he has enough people to handle front looks. But he's done that well through 3 games. I know people will say the quality of competition, it's still the NFL, and teams still, believe it or not, actually show up and try to do things tactically. So, I think he's done all of that really well. This will be a challenge because Dallas is fast, they're aggressive, they play a lot of man coverage. My guess is you'll see the Trayvon Diggs, DJ Moore matchup. Diggs did not match up to anyone on the Eagles because I'm sure they felt there was no one that specifically had to be matched up to at this point in their NFL careers. And you mentioned Dallas. The last 2 weeks, they've run the ball because they've played 2 defenses that played predominantly split safety, 2 shell coverages. Right. So they've run the ball. And I thought Zeke looked really good this week. He just didn't break the long one to give him, 130 or 140 yards. But I thought he ran hard. I thought he ran with light, quick feet. He cut well. I think he's looked good this year. So I would think Dallas, unless they feel based on what Carolina shows them, but Carolina shows a lot of different looks. They're going to play a lot of split safety as well as single high. So I would expect Dallas to still focus on the run game.
That Carolina front seven has been so fierce, so fast, and it was such a, not just because you brought them up, Greg, but they're starting to, obviously the undefeated record allows them to attract more attention to themselves, but from what they're doing on both sides of the ball, they've been a really, really enjoyable team to watch, and that's going to be a really fun game. What's coming up on the NFL matchup show? I know that you guys are probably going to talk about Brady and Belichick in New England. What else are you guys going to cover in detail for the people to DVR and make sure they're getting smart on Sundays? It's
interesting. They're both coming off losses, but it's obviously a huge game. So yeah, we're going to talk, again, we don't necessarily get caught up too often in quality of competition. You have to line up every Sunday. And if you're 3-0, you know what? You're 3-0, Buck, right?
Right.
So we're doing Ravens at Broncos. That's cool. A really interesting game, because Vic Fangio is one of the savants in the NFL defensively. You could talk to Coach Mack about him. Fangio is phenomenal. So this is going to be a really intriguing game. And I think that the Ravens have done a much better job this year of presenting throws for Lamar Jackson. And when the throws are presented, he can make them. So I think they're doing a much better job with that. And I think Lamar's been throwing the ball pretty well.
They just need the receivers to stop dropping the ball on him.
Well, they get Bateman back. I think Miles Boykin is back this week. So they're going to get their core of receivers.
Yeah.
Cards at Rams. Obviously, we talked a little bit about that. We talked Panthers-Cowboys. Raiders at Chargers, another really big game. Look, we spoke about how much Brady's throwing it. Carr's right behind him in terms of number of pass attempts. They've been throwing the ball a lot too, and they have such good pass game concepts. Say what you want about Gruden. I know he was 10 under 500 going into this year, his fourth year there. But when you just talk about offensive football and being able to tactically attack defenses with schemes and, with personnel, formations, they line up and they play with tight ends as much or more than any team in the league. So John Gruden is just really, really good. That's a fascinating matchup against Brandon Staley, who's one of the best young defensive minds in the game. So that's a really fascinating matchup. And then, I know they're both coming off losses and Seattle's been disappointing, but Seahawks 49ers is a very big division game.
Yeah, you can't sleep on any game in the NFC West. Those teams are always so competitive and so much fun to watch. Make sure you set your DVR for the NFL matchup show. Greg, Sal Pal, Matt Bowman, they do a fantastic job. You already know this if you listen to the install. Make sure you make Greg happy. Leave us a 5-star review when you follow the podcast in the feed. Greg, enjoy the football this weekend as always, and I'll look forward to catching up with you next Wednesday.
Thanks, Buck. Appreciate it.